Hi everyone, this is Brad here, and today in today's demonstration, we're going to talk about being able to leverage narratives that go towards the forms that your field and/or lab technicians use when they're entering data into the system. These can be canned narratives where they're only inserting the basic or the required information instead of the entire narrative. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to do is kind of put my field technician hat on real quick and go open up a form that I have already created to kind of get my point across or provide an example anyway. So inside, I have a form here underneath field forms. Let's go ahead and open up. It's a daily activity report. It's just kind of my own version of creating a daily field report. There's many ways to do this. But what I want to point out really is this general area. So you can see I have a multiple choice list of different types of services. Not important that it may or may not match exactly what you do. The general idea though that I want to come across as is this. If I'm a technician and I say, I did a reinforcing steel observation, if I click this, note that there's a narrative that popped up for reinforcing steel. So that way I can come in here and I can type this out. I can say, here's my client, like that beams, this corner, maybe 90%, and I did 5 of them, something like that. So as I click into it, the whole narrative is taken care of, where I just entered in the placeholders. So when this goes through the whole review process, it's that much faster, and it's pretty much taken care of at this point. Now I can click into this. You can lock it down, or you can open this up for technicians as well if you want to be able to add some additional context to it. That's great. But let's look at something else. Let's take it a step above that. What if the technician also did a concrete placement observation? So if I click this now, notice there's a narrative for that one as well. Or even if you did some density testing, there's another narrative all unique to that specific service type. So that's what I'm going to show today on how to get to something like this to make it fast data entry, especially as it relates to narratives for your technicians. Now keep in mind, you don't have to have canned narratives like this. If you prefer to have open narratives, that's totally fine. A lot of technicians like to be able to really own what they're saying inside of the form that they're entering. That's totally okay. Just showing this off in case you are interested in taking advantage of these canned narratives that you can customize. So in order to do this, what we're going to do is I have 2 tabs open at the top of my screen. So we are going to get out of here and let's go, give me just a second here. Let's go into, just duplicated my tab. We're going to go all the way back to the very beginning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a brand new form to show you how we can leverage this. So in order to do that, if I want to build out a field form, I'm going to go open administration, and we're going to go underneath activity and click forms. So I have my various groups or folders, if you will, up here. I'm going to add one underneath this group that I created called field forms. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to click add activity form. So let's go ahead and do that. This is just me naming the type of form that I'm creating, and I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to call it a canned narrative form. Oops. There we go. Have it loaded. Canned narrative form. You can call it whatever you want. Again, daily activity report, daily field report. It's up to you. You're just giving it the name so far. So there's my new form. What we want to do next is click into it so we can start to add fields to this form. So let's click canned narrative form. So now I'm in the form designer area where I can start to add fields to this. Now MetaField does give me a couple of fields to start with, 3 of them. We have activity number, date, and technician. I want to build on this. So to begin, I'm going to create something similar to our form, our example form. Basically I'm going to create a multiple choice list of different types of services. And again, if yours differs from this, that's okay. We're going to kind of show you how you can add your own services into this. Okay, so that's what we're going to start off with, is a multiple choice field. So let's get back. I'm going to take a shortcut to my other tab, and we're going to add a field, and I'm going to call it the same thing. We're going to call it services requested. Okay, and I'm going to choose type. We're going to come down here to multiple choice. I could also maybe do a pick list, but I'm going to do multiple choice. Now, if you have a multiple choice, you have to provide the options to choose. So how do we do that? Well, there's really two ways to do it. The first way is this way, where you can simply add one option at a time, and I'm just going to do something like let's do nuclear gauge testing. So there's one. I could also do concrete placement, and we'll do one more. We'll do steel observation. Okay, so there's three of them. I'm going to hit save on this, and we're just going to hit pause for a moment, and let's go and see what this form looks like on the field technician side, because we haven't really done a whole lot yet. So I'm going to go up to my other tab, and we are going to back out of this form. So let's get out of here, and let's go look at the one that we're starting to create together. So I'm going to go into field. Let's click activity. And I'm going to pretend that I'm adding one, so I'm adding a new activity in a way, and I'm going to go underneath field forms, and here's my CAN narrative form. Let's go ahead and select it, and here it is. So this is what we've built so far. Here are the three fields that the system provided at the beginning, and then my 3 services requested, right? But they don't do much. They're just checkboxes right now. So it's starting to come to life a little bit, but let's take it a step further. So I'm going to come up to the top of my screen, and again, I have multiple tabs open. I'm going to go back to the form designer area. Okay, now maybe I'll go from the beginning, right? It's in admin, activity, forms, and here's my group and form. Okay, so you'll want to follow your own path. So here's my own form. Let's open this up again. Let's click edit. I had mentioned earlier that there's a couple of ways to get your options within a multiple choice field. The other way that you can do through it is a data source. So this approach will be useful if you want to create a data source that many forms that you create can reference. So a lot of times this might be useful for like weather or yes, no, not applicable, something like that. And I'll show you what I mean. So for a moment, we're going to go up into general. And if you don't see this tab, by the way, just hit this little kind of flyout button, right? But underneath general, we're going to go and click data sources. And this is where you can create data sources that your forms can draw from as you continue to grow. So I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it services requested, just like our field. See, I've already got it added here. That's okay. So we've added our data source, and we just basically gave it a name. So let's go find it in our table here. It's probably towards the back. There it is. There's the one I just added. But now we want to take that same approach. So we want to add our options into this data source. So again, I'm going to come here and click add option. And this is where I'm going to do, soil nuclear gauge testing. Same thing here, add option. Let's do concrete placement observation. Let's do structural steel inspection, and let's do a rebar, right? So I'll just do a couple more than I did before. So you can see I'm adding, again, services to this data source, and we're going to tie this to the form that we're building, okay? So I'm going to call that good, and we're now going to go back into the form that we've been working with. So I'm going to use my panel over here. Let's go into activity. Let's go and click forms. We're going to find the form that we're building. Mine's underneath field forms, and I'm going to click canned narrative. Okay. And so again, I'm going to make a change to this where it says multiple choice. Let's click edit. I'm going to get rid of these options. I don't need them anymore because I'm going to reference my data source. Okay. So instead of adding options, we're going to come down to settings, and we're going to go and click data source. And we want to look up the name of my data source, which is services requested. Okay, so that's going to be it. That's all we need to do now to have all of the values in my data source exposed to that. So if we want to quick take a check, again, I have a different tab open back on the field side. So we'll just do a quick refresh here. let's go ahead and, oh, there it is, my CAN narrative form, and you can see here are my options, right? So we have an extra one now. Now again, they're still just kind of checkboxes, right? They don't do much, and the goal of this is to provide canned narratives, okay? So what we want to do is go back to Form Designer. So go back to Home. Let's open up Admin and locate my form again. Now this is where we're going to add our canned narrative. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to come up and I'm going to click Add Field, and I'm going to go ahead and type out, let's just call it a density test narrative. Okay. So let's go ahead, and this time what we're going to do is we're going to choose text area, and then we're going to come down to settings. So as I click settings, what I want to do first is select default text. Okay, and this is where I can add in my narrative, being mindful that this little cheat sheet here is going to help me plug in my placeholders. So what we're going to say here is you can say, you know, I was out in the field. I'm just kind of doing something a little goofy. Field and performed, let's do double brackets as the item in blue tells me to. Number of tests. Say there were, let's do number of failures, how about, on this job site. Okay, so you probably want to expand on yours a little bit if you want to do something a little more in depth, but I'm going to call that good for now. If I hit save, and if I've done it correctly, my placeholders are going to be in blue with double brackets. Of course, if I'm missing a bracket, it's going to be just plain text, but we want the double blue. Okay. Now, an extra little tip here that I like to do is we're going to add one more setting, and that's this one, default replace all placeholders. So that basically just means that the technician can populate both the number of tests and the number of failures in one kind of sequence versus one at a time. That's just my preference. You can try it without it, but I suggest it. That's just me. Now, the next thing that we want to do, though, is we only want this message to display if somebody, I'll move this aside a little bit, if somebody actually chooses density testing in our multiple choice field. So how do we do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to come down to our visualization rule, and we're going to click Edit. And the expression that we want to use is this right here. We're going to double click Contain, so it populates up here. Contain is the one that we want. And if we look over here in blue, these are the fields that we have added to our form in the background. So we can see that the system names here match what we see here. So what I want to do next is, you can see right here, these are my different types of services. I can click that little arrow. But what we want to do next is, this is just my approach. You can certainly just key your way with your, you can type them in, but I like to highlight it. So I'm going to say if basically the service requested field, I double clicked that, has the value of soil nuclear gauge density testing, we want this field to show up. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and hit save, and if you've done it correctly, the system will let you proceed. So there's one. Let's add another. Let's do a concrete one. Let's do concrete narrative. Okay, same approach. Text area, settings, default text, and you can say, you know, I observed a number of yards, concrete pour. I collected, let's see here, I collected, let's do number of specimens, maybe we always do 4x8s, but again, if you do 6x12s, you can use a placeholder so that they can, you know, technician can input it on the fly if you want. But I'm just going to call it good. Maybe not the greatest text, but I think we get the idea. Again, I'm going to populate my placeholders one just as my own personal preference. That looks good. Let's add the same visualization rule. So let's click Edit, come to Contain. Again, I like to highlight this here. Double click on Service Requested. Come to Value. Let's do placement observation. And again, if you do it correctly, you want your quotes with your actual value. So if I get rid of this real quick, see how it's getting me my error. I want to make sure I have my quotes around that. So just key that back in, hit done, and save. So that's going to be it. Let's go and see what this is behaving like now as a field technician. Okay. So let's go back to our form. I'm going to go up to my other tab and go back to the beginning. And let's go find it. Activity. Go to field forms. Again, it's kind of like I'm wearing a field technician hat. Can narrative form, and here we go. All right, so here's our form. So hopefully, if I've done this right, if I click this value here, we should have a narrative that pops up. And there it is. That's great. So now I can click into this. I can say, I did 50 tests and I had 2 failures. There's my narrative. Same thing here. Here's another narrative, right? So I did 100, collected 4 cylinders, and I can move on. Okay? So that's going to be the form, right? We can continue building that out, but what happens when we want to build the report, the deliverable? So the next step would be if we take a shortcut. Again, I like to use multiple tabs. I'm going to come back to my form designer area. If we're building out the report, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to come over here to report designer. And again, this is a new one that I started with, but you can do this with existing. So I'm going to click add new report. Just, we can call this whatever we want. So I'm just going to call this a CN. Most times this will be like a daily activity report. Let's hit create. And so now here is my report designer area. So now if you are unfamiliar with this area, we can come over to our data sets. And these are going to be the fields that are at the form level. So again, you have activity number, your concrete narrative, your density narrative, and so on. So if I hit close, those are the same fields that I can put on my report, okay, that are on the form. So let's go back to our report designer, click view template. Right now it's a blank canvas, okay? But we're going to come to our data sets and we're going to drag over some fields that we want to be placed on our deliverable. So now what we can do is I'm going to say, yep, I'm going to put the technician here, maybe the date. I can move these around. I'm going to select this panel. I can move over to the properties tab. So anything I do now is going to adjust this particular panel. I'll move it at 50%. You come over here like that. But let's get to our narratives, right? So here's my services requested. I can drag these over. You can render these however you want. Maybe we'll do horizontal checkbox, and we can play around with this a little bit. Let's do something like this. Let's make this 100, so it stretches the whole space. Let's come to our data sets. So what I really want to get to though is we want the system to be able to capture whatever narrative the technician fills out kind of in an intuitive way, right? So if they fill out a concrete narrative, we want that to be on the report. If they fill out a density narrative, we want that to be on the report. There's something kind of hidden here that I want to show you. So we're actually going to drag each narrative over like this. And this is where you don't have to call the narrative a density test narrative. We can call them all narratives, right? So maybe we just do something like this. Maybe we do, you can do something like this where we just say, that's a narrative. Or, that's a narrative. Or you can do something like this and just bring over a static one. So I'm going to drag and drop basically a panel right there, empty panel. Then let's bring over a label. And I'm going to click into it. Let's click properties. And I'm just going to type in, maybe field narrative like that. Okay. Maybe we bump up the size. Maybe we move this into the middle. Okay. We can even underline it if we want. Something like that. Bold. Sure. Okay. So that's good. And so then we don't need labels on each one, right? Just get rid of these. Okay. But this is the key thing though, is let's click into this narrative. We have what happens automatically is what's called the hide expression, which is right here. So let's click into it. So basically what this means is if the CAN narrative for density testing, if that equals null, in other words, if the technician doesn't fill it out, it's not going to display on the report. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, where if you only fill out a density narrative and you don't fill anything out regarding the concrete narrative, it's not going to show up on the report. It only will if there's a value. So let's hit save here and let's actually fill something out. Okay. So let's go into field, and we're going to go ahead and add an activity. And let's go into, let's see, there it is, CAN activity form, or CAN narrative. And again, so if I fill this out, right, I'm not doing a concrete placement observation. Because of my report designer, because of that height expression equals null, nothing's going to show up on the report. It's just going to be this right here. Okay. Oops, that doesn't make sense. So hit replace. We can call it good. We'll hit save, and then we can create a report. Okay. So that height expression report designer will help take care of unused narratives that may not have been filled out throughout this process. Okay. We're going to pause there for now. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. The last thing that I do want to mention is this. I usually like to do this. I'm currently presenting on version 2023.4. So if what we went through today doesn't match exactly what you are observing in your system, it's likely that the versions are a little bit different, but hopefully it's pretty straightforward either way. So again, if you have any questions, please reach out. But I hope this has been helpful. Thanks for listening.